all of our Mississippi Today members and Circle Giving members. Thank you for being with us today for this conversation to both mark and celebrate our first 5 years of publication. It is incredible that we've reached this milestone, and we've got two guys who were with us in those early days on the last 5 years, but also to let you know a little more about how we're thinking about growing and moving forward, and growing in things that we can't do without our member support. And we're just so grateful to you as readers, as donors, and as people who share the good work of our team at Mississippi Today. We are fortunate to have, I think, the sharpest, most thoughtful team of reporters in Mississippi right now. And with that, a board of directors that supports our work, that encourages us, and that gives us their time and input. Tray's a great example of one of our fine board members who is helping us carry this mission forward. I'm Mary Margaret White. I'm the CEO Executive Director at Mississippi Today. And while I was not in the newsroom on this day 5 years ago when we first published, I came along about a year after the fact and have just, it's hard to say how much I've enjoyed this work and enjoyed the nonprofit news community and the incredible impact that this business model can have on the way we produce journalism and the way we distribute journalism. So you all know there's never a paywall to read Mississippi Today. You choose to support us through a monthly donation or an annual gift. And because of that, we're able to allow all readers access to our news and all publishing partners access to republish our work. So thank you, truly thank you. I will introduce our guest and then I will get out of the way. Joining us today is Mississippi Today board member Tray Hairston. Tray is an attorney at Butler Snow, where he focuses on economic development. And Tray has a really interesting background, both as an attorney and as a public servant. He formerly was a policy advisor to Governor Phil Bryant, among a myriad of other both political and economic development work. Welcome, Tray. Thank you for being here. Joining Tray in conversation is, of course, our editor-in-chief, Adam Ganucheau. Adam is an original member of the Mississippi Today team. He joined us in 2016, covering state government and politics, and has since been named editor-in-chief at Mississippi Today. Adam's work has appeared across the nation, the New York Times, the Washington Post, and he was a 2016 finalist for the Investigative Reporter and Editor's Breaking News Investigation category. Lots of new awards under our belt since those early days, which Adam, I'm sure, can talk a little bit more about. But again, welcome to our presenters, and thank you all for being here.
Mary Margaret, thank you so much for the lovely introduction. Tray, thanks for being here. This is you know, I've really enjoyed getting to know you over the last few years. We've been reminiscing a lot the last couple of weeks about the past 5 years. My first day at Mississippi Today was about a month and a week before we even launched the website. And Tray, I believe you were on our board of directors before we launched the website too. We've both kind of been around since day one. So it really has just been a pleasure getting to know you these last few years. I've told you this won't come as a surprise to you, but your advice and your counsel on all things Mississippi, generally speaking, but especially politics in Mississippi, has just been incredible for me as a journalist, first as a reporter and now as an editor of this newsroom. So I'm excited for this chat. Thank you for being willing to do it.
Yeah, me too. This should be fun. And I didn't even send a bill, Adam. So, I mean, free advice.
That's right. That's right. We've enjoyed many a cocktail, I think, talking about things. And it's certainly could have been a hefty bill for us. So,
this is awesome. And you're right. We were there right at the outset. And I think I knew, like, when when I saw Donna Barksdale's name, I said, okay, this whatever this is, I think I want to be a part of it, because whatever she touches normally is wildly successful. And so, her work with the Junior League of Jackson and Mistletoe, and some of the origins of how that got started and how successful that organization has been raising money, and how diverse it has become over the time that I've become aware of what the Junior League was and is. And then just Leadership Jackson. I mean, if you know the history of that organization, she was right there at the ground level in helping to found it and create it. And it's done some amazing work throughout the city. So I knew then, I said, if she was involved, then this would be a hit. And so here we are 5 years later.
From my perspective, Trey, it was, I'm a journalist. I guess in 2016, I was just a couple years out of college. And my first job right out of college, I worked at the Clarion Ledger here in Jackson. It was a great experience, but there were some issues. I mean, I think anyone on this call who knows anything about journalism knows some of these things, but these national corporations that own a lot of the legacy print newsrooms across the nation, and Mississippi is no exception. Their priorities aren't straight a lot of times. And I got in that newsroom, and it was a tough place to work. And so as a young journalist, native Mississippian who wanted to do this work in Mississippi, I was really discouraged. That would have been, I guess, 2014, 2015. Sure. I was just so discouraged because there wasn't a place, an outlet in Mississippi where the journalism was the focus. I mean, it's really about, telling stories and being honest about problems in Mississippi, and doing our best to sort of provide accountability to officials at the local, state, and federal levels. And sure, it didn't exist in Mississippi, so I left. I didn't want to leave. I didn't want to have to leave, but I did. And you mentioned Donna Barksdale. Donna was obviously a founding board member of Mississippi Today, and without her and several others, yourself included, I mean, the first board of directors of Mississippi Today gave us this new outlet, this newsroom in Mississippi to do this kind of work that didn't exist. And it brought me back. I mean, without Mississippi Today, I probably wouldn't be a working journalist in Mississippi. So just so grateful for you and Donna and everybody who made this possible from day one, and everyone else since then who has been so generous with their resources and with their time and energy, and with their engagement, just generally speaking, reading articles, sharing them, telling your friends. It's been really cool to see this thing grow over the last 5 years. And you and Donna are both just a huge part of that.
Well, something you just mentioned that I'm going to put on my journalist hat, although I'm not a journalist at all, but I think we need to I want to dig into that, the leaving and then coming back. That has been something I have been so interested in, I don't know, maybe since 2013. When I was working for Governor Bryant, we had a Mississippi Young Professional Summit where we talked about the brain drain. So I'm really curious in what really makes someone want to leave, and then what makes them want to come back. And more importantly, I'm kind of curious take Austin, Texas, for example, or Denver, Colorado, or some of the major cities around the country are areas that have experienced a major increase in population. There's something, there's a characteristic about those particular places that make them attractive, that make people want to move there. And it probably started before the boom happened. There was a seed planted, it began to grow, and people began to come. But there's some, probably, I would argue there's some common denominators. And I'm kind of curious as to what those things are, and if they can be duplicated here, where I'm from, where I've never left, except for a brief stint, but always knew I was coming back. So for someone like you who left, and then made a conscious decision to come back, I wonder what goes through a young person's mind when that decision is being made.
Sure. I mean, you know, for me, again, speaking through the journalism lens, first and foremost, I mean, I wanted a good job where you know, journalism, it's no secret. I don't think that any journalist in America gets into journalism for the money. So it's not even necessarily about good paying jobs, although that has been an issue in some places and for some people in journalism. But for me, I wanted to be working in a job where I felt like I could grow and I was supported. And you know, so many of these legacy newsrooms in the state, like I said, they've lost sight of that. And I'll be quick to say it's not the fault of the people in those newsrooms in most cases. I mean,
Sure.
there are a lot of good journalists even here today who um, are doing great work, and I don't know what we'd do without them, frankly. But
Sure.
for me, at least, just speaking a little bit more broadly as sort of a millennial, a recent college grad who is a native Mississippian, I love this state. My line of work specifically, I feel like has this unique opportunity to really make a difference and do some real good. I wanted to feel supported. And, you know, like I said a minute ago, I wasn't feeling that previously, and that's why I left. But it's more than that too, Trey. I mean, you know, you come across this every day. We at Mississippi Today, we've made sort of the out migration to Mississippi a focus of ours in the past, and we actually have some very specific plans to drill into that in the next few weeks and months. But you know, I'll just speak from personal experience. You know, I'm a single young college grad. I need to be around other like-minded people my age. And, you know, something that Mississippi struggles with is, you know, having other young people around, young single people in particular. That's something that I think is getting a little bit better. It has been getting better, specifically in the Jackson metro area for the last few years. But Trey, you're talking about, you know, Austin. That's a prime example. I mean, young people want to move there because there's a lot of other young people, but those young people are there because of jobs. There because they feel like they can make a good living and do good work, but also live in a place that's vibrant and where they can sort of connect and have fellowship with like-minded people their age. And it's something that in Mississippi, unfortunately, you know, again, if it weren't for Mississippi Today, I wouldn't have felt that, at least the professional side. I wouldn't have felt secure enough to move back for that reason. But I realized, like I said, we cover this almost daily, and I realized that I'm fortunate to be in that position. I'm fortunate that this organization was created and founded 5 years ago, and that it gives me that. But you know, it doesn't, from covering this the last 5 years, it doesn't feel like often enough our elected officials and even sort of economic development officials have put enough time and energy into creating a place, a city like Jackson or another place that, you know, can be sustainable long-term for young people to want to live in, to move here and live here.
I agree.
That's something we've talked about this, Trey. Like you're not quite as young as me, unfortunately, but certainly, yeah. But you know, I know this has been a consideration for you. It has to be, right? I mean, you know, work in a number of places.
And you get the LinkedIn messages from a headhunter saying, "Hey, would you like to move to Nebraska or, you know, DC?" And I mean, this is home. And when I talk about, you know, some of the struggles of being home, you know, you'll hear that comment, well, you need to be the one that stays to help change things. And that comment will sometimes come from the very person that I feel that needs to change to make me want to stay. But when you begin to voice some of those opinions and concerns and how we need to become a little bit more progressive in certain ways of thinking, that's when you realize, well, we're not really trying to change, you know. And there's some analogies, Adam, like, I mean, just take the first car that was ever built. It has changed. Through technology, through things like science, we've made better cars. They're more fuel efficient. They move faster. They're safer. And so, you know, I think that same analogy can also be applied to culture as well. And I do want to get back to just the model of Mississippi Today being a digital newsroom, which we're seeing. I think in 2018 to 2019, there were more nonprofit newsrooms created than ever before. And please fact check me. I know you guys will. But that's just an interesting statistic to know and to hear that this is a model that's working. We've got the Mississippi Free Press. They have begun to do great work throughout the state. So I do think it's a model that works. I think it's a way when you're not as stressed about revenues and advertising, you can focus on some of the communities that have been marginalized or underrepresented throughout the state. You can become more diverse, more inclusive. There's a sense of belonging. You can focus on the poor. One of the books that I have been rereading is a book by a historian, and her name is Carrie Lee Merritt, and she wrote a book called Masterless Men that focuses on poor whites. And it talks about that juxtaposed to slavery and put everything in a historical context. And that to me, it's saying a lot to me historically about where we are now as opposed to where we were then. So I think I'm saying a lot here, but you're absolutely right. With being in a state like Mississippi, in a place that's so very complex, I want my voice to be heard. There are lots of different isms right now. There's the cancel culture, and I'm really confused by that, because cancel culture to me, for a person like me, there are lots of things I can't say right now. I might be economically disenfranchised for saying them, and it's always been that way, and maybe it will always be that way. But for the cancel culture, it's like, okay, for a year or two, there's a certain group of people that are angry because they can't say a certain thing, or not because they can't say it, they have free speech to say it, but they will be economically affected by saying it. Okay, now you know how I feel. So
Sure.
anyway, I'm just kind of pontificating out loud, but we're having a conversation, so I can do that.
That's right. I mean, all of what you just said, I think, goes back to sort of this 5 years ago when you and Donna and the rest of our founders got together and hatched this idea for what you wanted Mississippi Today to be. I think we were always sort of driven or steered by three main values, as I'd say. I mean, there are several things that we sort of used as guiding principles or North Stars or however you want to describe it. But I think it was always anchored in these three values of fairness, accountability, and truth. And Tray, you talk about cancel culture, you talk about sort of where we are today as a society and how that's difficult to navigate. Mississippi Today has changed a lot in 5 years. I could name, a long bullet list of illustrations to show how much we've changed over 5 years. But I'm proud to say that those three values I just named, like I said, fairness, accountability, and truth, we've stuck to those. And I mean, to be completely honest, it's been difficult because these 5 years have been, particularly our bread and butter is covering politics and
Sure.
State government. And these last 5 years, everyone seemingly, regardless of stripe, political affiliation, race, socioeconomic status, everyone has really developed their own definitions of all three of those words: fairness,
Sure.
accountability, and truth. And like I said, it's been difficult for us to stick to them. And, this might sort of be opening a can of worms that I don't know that we planned on getting into. But I mean, look, Mississippi Today, we're a new startup, I guess 5 years in now, but relatively speaking, we're a new journalism outlet, and we cover the state's most powerful elected officials. So
Sure.
I mentioned it's been difficult to sort of strike the balance of those three values. I mean, readers on the right side of the political spectrum will often criticize us for using kind of reporting through this liberal or progressive lens. And I said this recently, it's easy for me to see why that they think that, because I mean, I don't need to list the number of powerful officials in Mississippi who are of one single party, the Republican Party. So I can kind of understand why they think that, you know, when they see every other day we have another story that is critical or tough on a Republican official, I see why they think that. But at the same time, we often get criticized from people on the left side of this political spectrum for not doing enough to directly advocate for their positions or directly bring about political change in this state. And that's what I mean, I guess, when I say it's a difficult balance to strike, because
I get it.
you know, there's people on both sides saying that they want us to be more than we are. And that's especially difficult because in this political, or at least this partisan politicized era, you've got people who have weaponized those three values: fairness, accountability, and truth. They've weaponized them to sort of use for their own political purposes. And so kind of what we've had to do, you know, is stay true to how we define those three values from day one. And like everyone else, I guess we have our own definitions of what those are, but we try hard to stay above the political fray and be diligent about just doing the work and doing it the way that we best can. I don't know. Again, now I'm the one pontificating and saying,
no. So one of my favorite articles, one of my favorite reporters, and you already know this, it's Anna Wolf.
Of course.
Anna wrote an article, and I want to get it right. It was Meet Mimo Parisi, the political power broker who uses alternative data to paint a rosier picture of Mississippi. Now, that the content, again, this is taking it back to the brain drain, but
yeah, this is full circle here. I know where you're going.
Of what she wrote, and in my opinion, when you read the article, and I mean, you mentioned fairness, accountability, and truth. The truth behind that article, to me, and trying to push us to become better in an area that we're struggling, that we have a weakness. I mean, that not only seemed to be truthful, it was fair, but we're trying to hold our elected officials accountable for something that means a great deal to me. And so that was one of those articles that I just thought that, you know, it would have been published and we would have read it and we would have said, oh, wow, we need to work on these things. Where can we make ourselves better? But it was so politicized. You know, I got comments from various people. It was a volatile situation, but I think that's when you become better. And that goes back to the car analogy, you know, learning that a particular bump in the road, you need to the aerodynamics. You've always got to evolve. You've always got to change. And sure, there are certain things that are commonplace nomenclature. A car has to have four wheels, but you can continue to perfect it, continue to make it better. And I think I really appreciated that coverage. I would love to see more of that type of coverage, looking at it from all facets of the issue. Why are people leaving? How do we actually recruit people here? We recruit companies and industry. How can we also recruit people? Because I think those two things go hand in hand and they're interconnected. So now, again, I've been pontificating. I'm not telling anybody at Mississippi Today what to write, but that's something that I am forever going to be curious about. Since the first time I left the state and came back after visiting or living in another place for a little bit as an exchange student, I've always had this desire, this burning, deep-seated desire to make where I live better. And as long as I'm here, as long as I draw breath, I think those same things will always be a desire of mine.
Yeah, you know, Trey, I'm going to come back to those three principles again. I mean, it's easy for me to do that because that's truly how we sort of think about our work on a short-term and long-term basis. And again, I'm proud to say that these last 5 years we've stuck to it well. But I mean, whether you're talking about this story about Mimo Parisi and economic development, whether you're talking about poverty and government programs that may or may not have worked over the years, whether you're talking about public education and how our public school teachers are the lowest paid in the country and they're not getting much relief, you know, whatever we're covering on a day-to-day basis, we're thinking about everything through those three values. But, you know, you just said something a second ago that I think really hits home. I mean, I think, Trey, the reason why you were, besides Donna Barksdale just being an outstanding human being and probably being able to convince anyone to do anything if she really wanted to. I think probably part of the reason you really wanted to get involved with Mississippi Today is because we had this shared vision of holding government officials accountable. And whether you're someone who reads our work from, whether you're a hardcore Republican and you think that we're just a bunch of liberal communists trying to overthrow the Republican power in the state, or whether you're a hardcore progressive and you think that we need to be doing more to sort of level the political scales in Mississippi, I think there's some common ground that regardless of who you are, we can all agree on. And this is, again, why we all came together 5 years ago to start this newsroom, this organization. But that common ground, I would say, is unchecked power can only harm all Mississippians. Sometimes unchecked power can harm some Mississippians worse than others. It often does. We want to tell those stories, but as long as we're thinking about our number one goal of holding government officials accountable, of checking that power through the lens, again, of those values, truth, accountability, and now I'm forgetting the other value, fairness, of course.
Fairness, yeah.
You know, I think we're doing our job. And, you know, I certainly take to heart what you say. We, talking about economic development, actually last week, we hired our first ever full-time reporter who's going to be focused. Her title is economy and jobs. So
Bravo.
she's going to be on a daily basis, full-time, looking into sort of the systems and structures of economic development in Mississippi, how they work, how they haven't worked, how we can do better. Again, holding that power to account is what she's going to be doing. We're excited about that, but we're also excited she's also going to be our first Gulf Coast based reporter.
Wow.
So, you know, talking about some of the changes that we've seen at Mississippi Today over the years, we are, you know, I think I've told you this story, Trey. My first day here, which was 5 years ago last month, again, before we launched, which is today, is the actual anniversary of launch. But it was a small office that you know, had fresh paint on the walls. I had to flip up an empty cardboard box upside down to put my laptop on. There was no Wi-Fi yet. I mean, you know, it was truly a humble beginning and a group of 5 of us who got together and had this vision. And since then, in the last 5 years, we've grown to total staff size of 23 people, which is the largest newsroom by far in the state of Mississippi. I'm very proud of that. We are the only statewide newsroom with reporters, full-time reporters based in several regions in the state. We have, of course, you know, more than a dozen reporters based here in Jackson. We have a reporter in the Delta. We have a reporter in North Mississippi and now the Gulf Coast. So we truly are trying to continue growing. We want to continue hiring reporters to do this important work and to hold these officials accountable. And we have big plans yet to come for sure. We're 5 years in, but this is the beginning for us.
That's awesome. I would not that you asked, but I would offer, and this is based on some of the areas that I am currently focusing on. But one particular piece of advice or a critique is to always continue to try to have a diverse inclusive, and equitable newsroom.
Sure.
You know, I'm on the executive committee of my law firm, and Butler Snow was founded in 1954. That was the same year that the decision Brown versus the Board of Education was handed down by the Supreme Court. A year later, Emmett Till was murdered here in Mississippi. And so I'm always thinking about this place, how it's affected by race and gender. And so with regard to those three principles, diversity, inclusivity, and equity, and there's all sorts of tentacles that are built in terms of fairness, truth, and accountability. You know, I'm a public finance lawyer, and so I'm working on P3 projects throughout the country and here in Mississippi. But I'm always thinking about, you know, how those projects affect people, how they might help people, how does a community grow, how are the jobs being created, who's getting the jobs. So, you know, we can create billions and millions of dollars of investment, but who is truly getting the jobs? So that's something that's important to me. And so I'm always going to talk about race. And just because I'm talking about race shouldn't necessarily be a threat. Again, it's like the car analogy. We're simply making this car faster, better, more efficient. We'll get to where we're going faster. We'll make more money. And so that's one of the arguments I've been making about diversity, inclusivity, and equity. Not only is it the right thing to do, but you become more profitable as well. And just because, you know, it's another, and this is me, the whole riffing a little bit, but just because I mentioned race and I'm talking about race, you know, that doesn't necessarily mean that, you know, it's going to dismantle everything that we know to be. So the isms, like the cancel culture, there's a whole other side of it. You know, I experience racism, but just because I mention it to someone else, they're now offended by me simply mentioning racism. But I'm the one that actually, you know, wears the mask or the skin or experience it. So I'm really delving into these issues. And I think the same can be said. That's one of the benefits of having a nonprofit newsroom. I think you can do the same thing, and we can all hold ourselves accountable, whether it is hiring a diverse staff and reporters, or also choosing to do business with vendors that are diverse. And I mean that from you know, a state like Mississippi that's majority white, and the second race that is African American. But you know, I'm married to a Laotian woman, an Asian American woman, and when we think about the issues of last week, it just puts everything in an entirely different context for me. That I've been doing a lot more listening. I need to do a lot more listening around gender and gender equity, the LGBTQ community as well. I mean, those are all things that I think as this newsroom grows and it truly thinks about its mission of fairness, accountability, and truth, that I think we will wholly embrace those other issues as well.
Absolutely. Tray, I'll say quickly, and by the way, I think Mary Margaret, she put this in the chat, but if you're on this Zoom and you have questions for me or Tray, we're going to take a few questions in just a minute here. So if you have any questions, feel free to type them in the chat and we'll get to them. But Tray, I'm fortunate enough that you shared your article that you mentioned with me, the draft of it at least. And
yeah.
I can't wait for you to continue fine tuning that. And it's powerful. And it tells a story that I think needs to be told in Mississippi, and can't wait to see how that plays out. But, you know, every newsroom in America, in particular in this last year, since early summer of 2020, of course, when when George Floyd was murdered by Minneapolis police. Of course, on the heels of the Breonna Taylor murder in Louisville, Kentucky, the Ahmaud Arbery murder in Georgia, the list goes on and on, as we know. But in this sort of moment, this national reckoning on racism and sort of racist systems, we were like every other journal, hopefully every other newsroom at least, and we took a step back and we said, how have we messed up to this point? You know, we're coming up on our fifth anniversary where we are, like you said, Trey, this sort of new model. We can be who we need to be.
Sure.
We took a step back and we implemented several programs internally that I'm really excited about. I'll mention a couple specific ones just briefly. One is one problem that we had is diversity among our reporting staff, right? And for me, it's not about numbers. It's about truly, I mean, the perspectives that we have in our newsroom, the people who are helping guide our coverage, not just what articles we write, but how we write them. You know, me as a white man speaking as the editor-in-chief of this newsroom, I need those perspectives. And, you know, personally, this was even before the George Floyd murder last year. I did this series on the Democratic Party. It was this sort of deep dive into how, even though the Democratic Party, the vast majority, 2/3 at least of its members in Mississippi are African American, they had only had one single Black leader in its entire history. So this long series that I was finishing up was just about like why that is and how, you know, white moderates, as they would call themselves, had sort of controlled the party up until that point, and why even the Black membership of the party had felt marginalized in the year 2020. I was doing an interview with Congressman Benny Thompson for that article, and when we were finishing it up, and he, of course, had this sort of institutional knowledge about what the problems have been and where we need to go from here. And at the end of the call, he said, you know, I don't know you very well. We've had some run-ins, but I just want to thank you for doing this, because I've been a politician in Mississippi for, you know, 40, 50 years now. And I don't remember a time in which any newspaper or newsroom decided that they wanted to take on this issue specifically in this way. And I don't say that to pat myself on the back, but what that did for me personally, and again, this is even before I was editor of Mississippi Today. It was before the George Floyd murder. It made me realize, it made me actually go study some about the history of media in Mississippi and how, man, like just how backwards and racist the most powerful platforms in this state, media platforms in this state, have always been. And, you know, in many cases that has continued today. And you're right, Trey. I mean, I feel the weight, the gravity of that. And, you know, everything that we do, some of these initiatives that we've started, like creating a pipeline of young, we call it the Emerging Reporters Fellowship. We wanted to create a pipeline of soon to be college graduates who wanted to enter the field of journalism to have the opportunity to get some good investigative reporting experience with us while they were finishing school, but also give us a chance to offer them full-time jobs when they finished. Proud to say that we're about to see our first fellow. We're about to hire her full-time next month.
That's awesome.
So, you know, things like that we can be doing. We've really been diligent, and we've made a real concerted effort to think about these things in a way that can help all Mississippians, but also help us be that sort of shining light in this media landscape in Mississippi that, to be completely frank, has just fallen short of where we need to be in the blackest state in America, by the way. So
I'm happy to hear that. You know, as a lawyer at a firm that boasts, you know, close to or right at 400 attorneys, you know, making partner and then having the responsibility, or the awesome responsibility, of then trying to mentor other young lawyers that are coming through the ranks so they too will make partner. You know, our numbers throughout the entire legal industry, staggering a little bit. And so in those, I'm happy to hear about that emerging reporter program, because I feel an awesome responsibility to young lawyers coming after me to transfer that expertise. And that's just huge. I mean, with the practice of law regarding how very apprenticeship it is, you don't necessarily learn the tools to be a good lawyer in law school. You'll learn the critical thinking, and you'll become very pessimistic and question everything. Are you sure? And let's and so you'll get some of that. But I really want to be an individual that will really push and give back and help this new emerging group of lawyers. And honestly, a really male-dominated paradigm. I mean, and so I've always got to check my own, biases, and we have them. We all have these really undercurring biases, and so we have to always question it. We always have to share what we're writing to someone to look at that and check it for a lens of male dominance, because we can all be guilty of it. So I saw Mary Margaret just pop back on, and
ready for Q&A for sure.
Yeah. In the chat, we've covered a lot here. This is fun. It was.
Yeah, thanks to you both, Adam and Tray. We've had some nice comments from our attendees. One comment particularly from Jabari Edwards, I believe. I've just lost the comment, just saying thank you for being honest, for having these frank and real conversations. I do want to share a question from Dorothy Triplett. I'm going to read it directly. An issue for Mississippi has been politicized that's not a political issue: Medicaid expansion. The efforts of many people, and particularly an organization of nonprofit and interfaith member institutions working together Mississippi, has helped the issue to be revived in the legislature. 300 plus religious leaders signed a letter to every member of the legislature and its leaders asking them to pass SB 2799. Talk about how Mississippi today can hold the legislature accountable.
Yeah, that's a great question. It's something we talk about a lot in the newsroom. Working Together Mississippi, by the way, such a great group of folks who are just doing amazing work in Mississippi. We talk regularly with them and have a lot of respect for them. But as to what we can do, you're going to see a lot from us in the coming weeks. I think, as far as I know, we had the only story in the state that sort of highlighted the notion that in this new federal stimulus package, Congress is offering even more of a financial incentive to the 12 states that haven't expanded Medicaid to do so. They're upping the ante in terms of sort of the federal match that they provide states who want to expand Medicaid. And I think, Dorothy, you said specifically this is estimated, if we were to expand Medicaid, it would provide healthcare to an estimated 300,000 Mississippians. So it's a huge deal. Those are people who, most of those people, as we understand it, are working, I guess we would call them the working poor. So people who have jobs, but they don't get health insurance offered by wherever they work, and they can't afford it themselves. So, there's a lot of stigma around Medicaid expansion, around sort of, offering government assistance in any way. We've seen that politicized. I would argue that Medicaid expansion is the most politicized single issue of the last decade in America, specifically here in Mississippi. What we can continue doing at Mississippi Today is, providing the facts and context, like talking about, the federal stimulus package, offering a lot more money to Mississippi if we were to expand. But another thing that I love about what we do at Mississippi Today, and this is regardless of beat or subject area or story, is that we like to focus our reporting on people who are affected by policies either passed or being considered. So what you can expect from us in the coming days and weeks is a lot of coverage of how people are affected people who don't currently can't afford health insurance themselves. They can't afford to go to just a primary care doctor for a common ache or pain, let alone to an emergency room if they're having a more serious condition. We're going to tell the stories through their eyes and their lived experiences, and we'll hopefully utilize sort of the goodwill and sort of the respect that we've generated these last 5 years at the state capitol, and hope that the right people read those perspectives and read those stories. And that's what we do. I will just really quickly say, Trey, you may have something to add, but
Well, I've got a question for you.
Sure, go ahead.
Well, it's in line with what you just said. How, in terms of truth, fairness, and accountability, and being labeled sort of a left-leaning organization, and maybe all media is labeled in that same regard, but how do you take the politics out of what you do on a daily basis, Adam? Because I hear it. I get that criticism, and I'll read the article, and I'll call you up and say, hey, here's what I think. So with an issue like that you said is very politicized, but arguably healthcare should not necessarily be politicized, what does our organization do to remove that particular stigma of being left-leaning and being more centrist? And is that even necessary?
I mean, for some issues like healthcare, I don't know that I would say, 75-year-old white man who lives in rural Mississippi who can't afford to go to the doctor is, that's not a political issue. So, we try to take the step back and say, look, we are in the state capitol every day. We hear the rhetoric from officials like Governor Tate Reeves, who has, anytime he's asked the question, should Mississippi expand Medicaid, he uses the word Obamacare immediately. I mean, that's the line is, should we expand Medicaid and give 300,000 Mississippians access to health care? He will say the word Obamacare within the first 5 words of his answer, regardless of what the setting or context is. So yeah, I mean, we do our best to take a step back and say, look, taking politics out of it, forget what Tate Reeves says, forget what the legislative leadership has said or not done over the years. How are real Mississippians affected by this? I think it's important for us to keep in mind, and this is something that goes back into sort of what I was saying earlier about the weaponization of these 3 values: fairness, truth, and accountability. We're not advocates. At the end of the day, we're journalists, and what we want to do is tell real stories as often as we can through the lens and experiences, eyes and experiences of people most affected by policy, and try to just stay above the political fray. And look, like I said, that's difficult. It's
well, think about this though. I mean, again, in truth, fairness, and accountability, have we ever analyzed, and again, we're not advocating, but have we ever analyzed from the perspective of, if Medicaid were expanded, let's take out the issue of, the individuals that would receive health care. Let's not analyze that issue, but can we analyze the expansion from the perspective of its fiscal nature? So if there's an argument that we shouldn't do it, that the governor is making, can we not analyze, if we did do it, according to the governor, what would actually happen to our budget? What other programs would be cut? How would it affect us negatively? And again, I'm not making a value judgment. I'm just saying from the standpoint of the analysis. Sure. I think it's important, and it might lend credence to our objectivity of being very fair, holding others accountable, and also telling the truth, because there's always another way to look at something. So again, not giving advice. Sure. These are just questions that I'm curious about. Another thing I'm curious about is, and I know we want to get to some of the other questions in the chat, but Donna Ladd on this past weekend, I think, she tweeted, and it was a really interesting tweet, and it showed the number of physicians going from, I guess, medical school to the UMC's residency program. And there wasn't a single African-American person in the picture, in the frame. And she tweeted, "This is jarring." And I was like, "You're absolutely right, it is jarring." And a developer that I'm doing some legal work for also tweeted, like, this is some data that she's interested in, because she's an applied scientist and she can do the math and look at the algorithms, et cetera. But I am curious, and this is a gentle nudge. I would be curious to see how, as I've seen us partner with WLBT and some of the video media, I'd be curious to see how we might partner with the Mississippi Free Press, another digital newsroom. And I'm curious to see how we might even partner with Y'all's Politics. I mean, and then maybe even hearing what are your thoughts on just what type of medium is Y'all's Politics, and how do they work together? How would we work or collaborate on something? Is that even possible? So
Sure.
I'm going to go on mute, Adam.
Well, I do want to jump in, Trey, and say that the question about Medicaid, I linked a story in the chat, and reporting we did early in the session on Medicaid was in partnership, like you just mentioned, with other for-profit and nonprofit newsrooms, the Mississippi Center for Investigative Reporting, MPB, Clarion Ledger, Jackson Advocate, and the JSU Center for Media Studies. We specifically looked at Medicaid because of sort of the expansive nature of that story. And I think one way that Mississippi Today is able to reach readers on issues like this that are not political but have been politicized is to really dig in with our data teams and our visualizations teams and really show people what that expansion looks like. Give them the resources. I think a lot of folks are sort of for Medicaid expansion or against it without a lot of information about it. And that was really our goal with Mississippi Spotlight and that collaboration, was to say, hey, take a look at these resources. They're linked in the chat. You guys can look at them yourselves to really see like what the numbers look like, what expansion does cost Mississippi or does not cost Mississippi. So to answer your question, like we are definitely interested in more collaborative work, because we know that many of you, our members, our most loyal readers, we're not reaching all Mississippians. And we know that we can reach more people with our reporting, the more we're able to partner with other newsrooms. And anyone who's ever worked on a collaborative project, whether that was in your high school science class or in your professional life, that that's hard work. It takes really coming together and getting on the same page when, we may have different priorities, but yeah, it's definitely been worthwhile, and you'll see more work coming out of Mississippi Spotlight. I do want to add our last question, since we've just got about 5 minutes left in the chat, and that is from an unnamed attendee. What are some of the key short and long-term goals for Mississippi Today? I think that we've made clear today that, having a staff and a readership that looks like the population of Mississippi is a top goal for us. Diversity, equity, and inclusion, not only in race and gender, but also in, sexual identity. So we're thinking through all of those things and definitely making hiring plans to do that. But Adam, as from an editorial perspective, I know that you've put a lot of thought into where your priorities are. Maybe you can give people a glimpse into what they might see in coming months.
Sure. I think I mentioned earlier just the notion that we have grown in 5 years to the largest newsroom in Mississippi. It's something that sounds great. Like, for us, it is great. Like, there's no way of looking at it in Mississippi without thinking that. But I was speaking with Margaret Sullivan, who's the media columnist for the Washington Post, a few weeks ago, and she was just asking me to sort of give just a recap of the state's media landscape. And I said that to her. I said, we're proud of this. This is something that we couldn't have done without support over these last 5 years. And it's something we've really worked hard to get to, place we've worked hard to get to. And she said, "Oh, well, you're the largest in the state. How many is that?" And I told her, and she said, "Really? That's it?" So it's kind of all about perspective there. For us, it's a good thing, not at all complaining, very just fortunate and grateful to have everyone's support over these last 5 years to get us to where we are. But goodness knows in this state, we need as much light shined on as many government officials as possible from the local level all the way up to the federal level. So, long-term goals, I guess you could say short and long-term for this one. We want to keep growing. We want to keep hiring reporters across the state, not just based in Jackson, but truly continue our sort of statewide reach so that we can hold those officials accountable and hopefully inspire readers and viewers or Mississippians to become more civically engaged, to get involved however they see fit in the political process or the government process. Some shorter term goals. I mentioned already, Medicaid expansion is going to be a really big issue. So this legislative session is expected to end in the next week or two. Legislative leaders have made it pretty clear they have no appetite to talk or debate this year. But everyone from the activists that Dorothy mentioned all the way to Republican political leaders at the Capitol have suggested that next year might be an interesting year as it pertains to Medicaid expansion. So you can expect us to continue covering it ourselves, working with this collaboration that Mary Margaret just mentioned, to continue sort of shining a light on that possibility in Mississippi. We want to continue sort of looking into issues like teacher pay. That's another priority of ours. We think that Mississippi has long been at the very bottom of the list for average teacher pay. That's something that lawmakers really haven't done a great job of addressing over the years. They say they will during election season, and then they don't follow up with it. We'll continue focusing on that. You can expect some other sort of looks at systems like I'll mention one specific one: lobbying in Mississippi. It's sort of, we call it the Wild West. There are very, very few laws in Mississippi that dictate how lobbyists can operate and what they can get away with. So you can expect to see a little work from us on that in the coming weeks and months too. But just generally speaking, we're incredibly grateful for the support. We literally can't do any of those things I just mentioned without the support of our generous donors and engaged sort of supporters. But we want to grow. We need to grow. Mississippi, I'm not saying that we're the answer, but we're certainly an answer. It's the generosity. It goes back to that generosity of the people who have supported us the last 5 years. Traditional media in Mississippi is a pretty bleak place right now. And we want to keep growing, and we feel like we can continue providing great public service through journalism that keeps that strong accountability on government leaders, but also helps us all keep an eye toward the future of Mississippi. So hope that answers the question okay.
Well, thank you both. Thank you, Adam, and thank you, Tray. Again, lots of positive comments on what a rich and just honest conversation we've had today. And I do want to be mindful of time and honor that of all of our members who joined us today for this conversation. We are going to publish this on the website later this week for general consumption. And if you found today's conversation engaging, I hope you'll share it, encourage other people to watch and learn a little bit more about our history and about where we intend to go. Again, on behalf of Adam, Tray, the board of directors and the staff here, we are so grateful. We thank you, and we look forward to continuing to make you proud and to really serve you, because ultimately we here report to you about Mississippi and about the things that we think can matter most to you and your lives. So again, thank you all for being with us today, and keep an eye on your inbox. We'll be having more virtual and hopefully in-person forums throughout 2021 to continue to celebrate 5 years of publication. Thank you.